Hello and welcome to chapter 4 of the King's Indian Masterclass. Today we're exploring 7 d takes e5, the exchange variation. As always, we're going to be talking about all of the main lines and theory that you need to know. We're also going to be leaving a PGN in the description below so you can follow along with the theory. And with that out of the way, let's jump in. The first thing to understand about the exchange is the basic idea for white, which is to exchange the queens off the board as well, and very much simplify the board into an endgame which is very drawish in nature. Now, just as a disclaimer from the beginning, you have to be okay with going into a drawn endgame and leaving the game with a draw. You cannot force something from this position because white has the privilege of starting with the move. They chose to go into a simplified drawn position. You basically have to accept that. Now, I know that for many King's Indian players that is disappointing because you want to go for the f5 attacking lines that we explored in the previous 3 chapters, but that is just not something that you can really choose in this situation. The good news, a draw with black is typically not a bad result, especially if it's a very easy draw to get. You don't really have to fight for much in this position as long as you understand the basic moves that you need to play from the beginning. So in this position, there's a couple of things to understand. First of all, knight takes e5 is a move you might be wondering about. This does not win a pawn in view of knight takes e4, and after knight takes and bishop takes e5, equal material, and again the position is simplified. We can get the bishop out, the knight out, we control the d-file. It's in fact black who is now a little bit ahead in the game. They can take on f7 after we take here on e4 with the intention that after king takes f7, they take e4. This is not good for us, but we can throw in bishop takes c3 with check and then take on f7, and we're actually up a piece in this resulting position. So this is sort of the tactical justification, honestly, for the King's Indian, because you wouldn't be able to go e5 if they could just win a pawn by exchanging everything and taking here on e5. So this is a tactical variation you need to know. And so the question is, what's the main move? What's the continuation? Well, the critical move here is bishop to g5, pinning the knight, and now trying to add a lot of pressure. One idea is to go knight d5 next, adding more pressure to this pinned knight and also hitting c7. Additionally, with this move, notice that because the rook is hanging here, the knight is pinned, the threat of knight e5 is now actually a threat that you have to worry about. And so the move that you need to play here is rook e8. Now, this seems a little backwards. You're taking the rook away from the open d-file into a very passive role where it's seemingly only defending on e5, but don't worry, this is very temporary, and we're soon going to reactivate all of our pieces here, and you're going to see that white doesn't get as much as this position visually looks like white could actually hope for. So from this position right here, white needs to go knight d5. This is the critical move that really tries to give white as big of an advantage as they can go for, although objectively this is drawn as well, and we're going to take a look at this, the main line, the critical move. But first, I want to illustrate what happens if they don't go knight to d5, and they, for example, castle. In this position, we go c6. We stop them from having the privilege of going knight d5 at a later time, and now it's really difficult for white to generate anything from this position. I mean, it is complete equality here. We're going for knight d7, knight c5, bishop e6, or bishop g4, getting the rook into the game. I mean, this is a position where neither side really can push for anything more than a draw. In fact, black is the one that, if any, I would prefer in this position because you can see that the knights are quite strong. There's the idea of putting a knight on f4. There's the idea of getting the rook to the d-file and really opposing the undisputed control that this rook currently has on d6. And ultimately speaking, we can always choose to wreck the pawn structure. You know, you can imagine bishop takes f3 and then planting a knight on f4 could be a strong strategical approach to this position. Black is completely fine here and has quite a lot of play, certainly more than white does. And so knight to d5 is more or less necessary here for white to try to get anything from the position. And the truth is, we have to take, because they're threatening the knight, they're threatening here on c7, so we're going to take. They take back with the c-pawn, and their claim is that in this endgame, they're a little bit better because they have more space in the center. But this is wrong because we simply go c6 and we get rid of that only advantage they had, that control in the center. And after c6, again, white has no advantage whatsoever because we're immediately contesting that center advantage. Now, bishop to f4 is the main move here. I'm going to also explore the sideline, which is d takes c6. The move d takes c6 here is simply met with knight takes c6. It gives us an excuse, a way forward for the knight to develop. And the truth is, I mean, we're just getting simple development. I mean, the bishop is coming to e6, the rook can come into the game, the knight can come to d4. Here you can play h6, for example, kicking away the bishop, trying to gain control over the d8 square. And in fact, if they insist on keeping contact, we can go g5 and truly restrict that. And here, I mean, you can go rook to c8. That's the move that the engine said is the best, but there's many alternatives. You can go g4, you can certainly go rook d8 as well. Any natural move keeps complete equality. In fact, the engine prefers black here. And the simple reason for this is that we actually have a good control in the center. I mean, we have extra space on the king side, and, we have more space towards the center as well. We have more potential. Objectively speaking, this should end in a draw, but again, practically, black has a slightly easier time to play this, gaining control over the c-file. Ideas now of going knight to b4 or maybe knight to d4. There's certainly ideas that black can play for. So going back to this position, this is why bishop c4 is the move that is played here. White is maintaining their control in the center. Now, here we're going to explore these sort of positions, and this is the main line of the exchange that you really want to understand. We're going to explore these through the lens of two game examples. Both of these are Daniel Naroditsky with the black side, who is obviously a great King's Indian player and has played this for a long time. Now, after bishop takes d5, because they take, the bishop now has very big control along this diagonal, and they're trying to make it as hard as possible for us to develop our bishop. I should quickly note, if they take with the pawn instead, we go e4, and then we can continue here by going, for example, bishop to f5, and then knight to d7, and again, we're getting unnecessary space. White does not need to concede this space in the center, so their best move is bishop to d5, maintaining some pressure, making it difficult for us to develop, and here precision is required, at least to some extent. You go knight to d7 here. This is my recommendation, and this comes with a not so obvious but very strong threat, which is the simple knight to f6, which would hit the bishop, but also not let the bishop retreat, because then we can take on e4, so we're immediately going to win the two bishops, and it's very difficult for white to actually maintain their two bishops. So typically what you're going to see these positions develop is into one where white has a little bit more activity with their pieces, but we have the long-term advantage with the two bishops in a relatively open board. So let's begin exploring these positions by looking at castles. What happens if white ignores the threat of knight to f6 and just decides to get their king out of the center, which I would suspect is a common move at the lower levels. Now here, you don't want to go knight f6 immediately, because white will take this and they're going to get rid of their two bishops, but they're going to do so in the most advantageous way, where they remain with a very dominant and absolute beast of a bishop here on d5 and quite active rooks, and it's not so easy for us to actually utilize our two bishops. White has sufficient compensation in that position. What we want to do instead is go h6, not give them the option to trade. And after the bishop moves, now we put the knight on f6, and we're going to gain the two bishops, but we're going to gain it in a more advantageous way, where, of course, if the bishop retreats, they hang over here on e4, so they're going to have to surrender this bishop, and in this position, we're much happier, because our bishops can develop much more easily. We don't have to worry about the pressure along this diagonal. We can immediately develop the light square bishop, bishop e6, and then we can go f5 and expand. Not necessary, but it is a nice way to kind of gain more initiative on the king side, open up the center a little bit. But ultimately, I mean, you want to get this rook into the game. You don't want to hang a7, so b6, a very thematic move in these sort of positions. Then you can get the rook into the game, and these are typically positions where, again, black has no difficulties. Black is the one fighting for more. And you can see that kind of with the expansion here in the center, and this was kind of really made possible by the move f5, so that's kind of why f5 is an important move to consider in these positions. And aside from that, I mean, we shuffle around our pieces, king to f7. There isn't much to these positions, because admittedly, white can go for the draw if they play very precisely, but as you see, black does have some level of practical advantage. I mean, the position here is one where the rook is more active, the bishop is very superior to the knight here, which is struggling for squares, because even though the knight on f4 seems pretty strong, it doesn't actually do much. And You can see that is kind of proven when Danya decides not to go for the repetition here. He's fighting for more in this position. He's plants the bishop on d3. Now this is really clear that the bishop is stronger than the knight, and you expand, you eventually make weaknesses, and now rook to c2 is a nice tactical way to finish off the game. You sack the rook, but if they take, you take back, and you force them to give away their knight, and this is a winning position, of course. So in the game, Firouzja, by the way, who's playing black here, he decided to go for this tactic, but it doesn't work because the knight is simply no match against these two pawns. So going backwards, you can see kind of the essence of these sort of positions where black is the one who is going for a bit more. Black has, a bit of a practical edge in these endgames. Now let's back all the way up because I want to now look at the second option that white has, which is the more precise one. After knight to d7, if you recall, we just looked at the kind of random, not really addressing the issue of knight f6, the move like castles. But in reality, the move knight to d2 is the stronger, more mainline option. It's the most, theoretical option that white has, and the simple purpose is that now the pawn on e4 is defended, so knight f6 is not as strong because the bishop has the luxury of retreating without hanging the center, and we don't actually win the two bishops. So what we go for instead in this position is we put the knight on c5, where it is far stronger than on f6, because now, first of all, it defends b7, and therefore, relinquishes the need for the bishop to defend b7, gives the bishop the ability to develop very soon to e6, as you will see. It also puts pressure on e4 and defends e6, so that when we have this exchange, the knight captures back and is now again a beast in the center. So this is another game example that we're going to explore kind of these sort of equalish, drawish endgames with. You can see here that the bishop decided it was necessary to take because otherwise the knight is really difficult to kind of ignore because there's various different jumping points where the knight might be threatening to go. So the bishop decided to clarify the situation by taking, but now this bishop really shines on its kind of uncontested dark square diagonal. You can see that we're going to take back control over the c-file, not give white any advantage here. And again, it's black who's the only one with practical chances because although the center looks nice, as you can see by the move f6, it's very flimsy and very soon going to dissipate. We have knight to c4, we have takes, and indeed, the position simplified into one where black is up a pawn. And this is the small advantages that you end up getting in these positions. You have a practical advantage, a positional advantage with the pawn on d3 and more space and more activity, and that transforms into a material advantage being up a pawn. And again, this is a very small advantage, and in theory, black can probably not force a win here. White can probably hold a draw if they play completely accurately. But from a human, practical standpoint, even at the Grandmaster level, which this game is, that's very difficult. Now, the game ended up simplifying. We had some trades of pawns. A couple nice tactics were used here where you cannot take the pawn because of the skewer. And as you'll soon see, this is kind of used once again. And then there's a final tactic to end the game where king to d6, very nasty idea, because after king takes, black set up a trap, rook to g5, giving away the rook, but ensuring the safe promotion of the queen, and now it is completely game over. And ladies and gentlemen, this will end our exploration into the exchange. As some quick reviews, I mean, quite frankly, this is a very drawish endgame. These sort of positions have very much drawish tendencies, where after bishop g5, rook to e8, black needs to be a little precise, not forgetting the move c6, and not forgetting, in these sort of positions, after bishop to c4, the move knight to d7 with the idea of going to f6, but as long as you remember these very early basic ideas, the end games that you're going to reach, the middle games that you're going to reach are very easy and very natural to navigate, and you're not going to have that many practical challenges. In fact, as I've mentioned time and time again in this video, black is often the one that both the computer and the human would, generally speaking, prefer. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure you subscribe for more content just like this one right here, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.